Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming here to listen to our discussion. So as far as I understand, Bogdana will be moderating the discussion. Yes, that's true. Hi everyone, happy to see all of you here. Hello, we are very happy to see all of you here. It's a pleasure to see both those people that we know and new faces. It's great that UTIC helps us see a lot of literary translators. It's a pleasure because, as we remember, in 2016 there were only few of us, and now there are so many of you, and we are about to conquer the world. Okay, let us start from this conference, and then we will conquer the world, definitely. Okay, but we will discuss it later in private. Nobody shall know about that. Okay, so I will start with a general question. I hope that it will be important for everyone, to those who would like to try themselves in literary translation. So, how did you start your career in literary translation? How did you start cooperating with the different publishing houses? Maybe you will tell us about the process, or probably you will give us a piece of advice on how to start. Okay, who will start? Katerina. Okay, Han, maybe you will start because you are present on site. Okay, I will tell you briefly. It seems to me that my experience might be very useful for beginners, those who are making their first steps on the way to literary translation, because I've been in this area for only 3 years. I started doing translations later in my career. I'm 37 now. I've been working before at the National Bank of Ukraine as a translator and interpreter. And then I understood that I really like literature and I would like to translate books. So then I left my job and I started translating books when still working at the National Bank of Ukraine. It was actually quite easy. I don't mean translating, but to start translating, because back then there was the Ukrainian publishing was booming, and the publishing industry required a lot of new translators, or at least I thought so. I saw there was a vacancy in a job offering at Nash Format publishing house. I just saw this job listing. I sent my CV to them, and this is how my cooperation with this publishing house started. Then later, publishing houses started looking for me. So right now, I even have to reject some offers because I don't have enough time to do all the translations I'm offered. So this was the start of my career. But what was the question you asked? How to tell me about this process? What advice would you give to beginners who would like to start being literary translators? Once I told students how to do that. First of all, I would recommend you not to be afraid. If you're a student, you can easily reach out to publishing houses. There are a lot of talented students or graduates who are much more talented than so-called older colleagues. And my editors are actually younger than me. Despite being young, they are very qualified. So at the beginning, of course, I had this cooperation with Nash format, but I opened Facebook page, I searched for different websites of publishing houses, and I wrote messages to them. Do you need a translator? Hello, I translate from this language. Do you need translators? Nasha Idea, our Idea publishing house, that publishes French comic books. So they were looking for a translator, and we've been cooperating with them for many years now. So I don't know how this method is actually called. But unfortunately, such job listings are not published on WorkUA website. Everything happens through different communication channels. I would also recommend to add as friends on Facebook all translators that you can reach out to. A lot of publishing houses are looking for translators through Facebook. And of course, I would suggest you to join different translators groups, such as Translators in Action. I don't know how Zoomers actually, whether they are active on Facebook, but you will need to get registered if you would like to have connections in literary translations or to promote yourself in this area, because all the scandals and intrigues are happening there, not on Instagram, not on TikTok. You also need to attend conferences, different conferences, attend Lviv Publishers Forum, Kiev Book Arsenal, Translatorium Festival in Khmelnytsky. There you will have the most valuable things, contacts, and contacts will lead you through cooperation with publishing houses. So Katerina, you are also working with several languages. You are translating from English and French. So how did you start your career in literary translation? Anatoly and Ali, we started together, so probably students will be interested in our experience, because we started from literary translation. It was our first area in translation that we started with. Back then, we were students. We were about to graduate, and we were lucky. What is really important to understand what you would like to do. When you understand that, when you finally understand that you want to translate literature, that you're interested in that, just start working. The most important is to love what you do, to be passionate about what you do. So everyone around sees that you are really passionate. You need to be self-confident, or at least make pretend that you are confident. Okay, we started translating with sci-fi, science fiction. We started with Stephen King, and we were lucky to start with such a writer. Now we understand it even better, but maybe we understood it even then. Back then, we were shocked. It was a wow effect that we were experiencing. But now we can really understand that. We now understand that it was an excellent first step. Because we were interested in science fiction, we started attending different festivals and gatherings related to this area. We've been translated for 6 years in this area, and it was an exciting moment. It was the time when our career started. In 2015, the first Comic-Con was held in Kiev. We went there, we started talking to people from this area. So this is exactly what Hannah said. You need to reach out to people, you need to talk to others who work in this area. So we met a lot of excellent people. We showed them that we are as crazy as they were. Yes, that's true. Personal contacts are very important in our area. You can be a very talented person, but if you don't go anywhere, nobody will know about you. If you choose this strategy, be sure that you will only get access to a limited number of projects. But if you communicate to people, it is easier to talk to them, it is easier to find common language, and it is easier to demonstrate that you are interested in a particular project. The moment we understood that we would like to translate books, we started writing to different people using different channels. We started writing to publishing houses, writing that we are so eager to translate Ray Bradbury. Please give us the opportunity to be a part of this project. We've been dreaming of translating Bradbury for many, many years. And it's not a problem. Some of them answer to us in a couple of months. That's not a problem. We went to the Lviv Publishers Forum. This is also an excellent place which gathers a lot of translators of books. So if you would like to work in this area, you do need to visit it. As for the internet contacts with translators, we need to work to communicate there. And of course, we also attended the Publishers Forum. We went to all the people present there and we said, we would like to translate Stephen King. We would like to do that. We are really passionate. We have one book which had been published before, so we are experienced. Well, it's funny to remember about that now, because now we have more than 20 publications, 20 published books, and we hope that the list will be even longer, because we really love our job. I translate from English and French, and as Hannah, I also translate comic books from French. I also work with French, and it's a pleasure. We even took part the same project. Yes, Katerina was added in my translation, actually. We are really grateful for this cooperation. We hope that sooner or later you will be added in our translation. Okay, now let's continue our discussion. We will continue our discussion about cooperation and editing a little bit later. But another question which might be interesting to students: if you analyze the number of translators of books, you can notice that a lot of them are not specialized. They are not professional translators. They might be linguists, philologists, or journalists, but they're not translators. So the question is, do you need to get a translator's diploma to work as a literal translator? Do you need to understand the theory in order to translate books? So, Hannah, over to you first. Thanks for the question. I also noticed that when I started translating books, that a lot of my colleagues didn't have a translator's diploma, but they were excellent translators. And I was surprised at first, but later I understood that I had to to learn how to translate like from scratch. I attended a lot of courses in literal translation because I understood that I wasn't taught that at the university. It seems to me that in addition to talent, you don't necessarily need a diploma. You need to read a lot. It is very important that you love books from early childhood. And of course, knowing a language is very important. You cannot do without it. Anatoly, what about you? Do you need a translator's degree and to know the theory in order to translate books? Well, I don't think that this is compulsory, but I don't think this is. It might be useful. And I'm lucky to have a translator's degree, and it really helped me in many things because I knew the theory. This is what adds to the discipline. This is what helps me to arrange my knowledge. I talked to many colleagues who came to this area from other areas, and it seemed like we did the same, but very often we noticed that, for example, our colleagues, they do everything in a proper way, but they cannot explain why they do that. They just feel the language, they understand the area, they have this gut feeling, but there is a theory behind that. And when you know this theory, you can go faster, or you can be more confident. Well, that's interesting. When we are asked whether you needed a translator's degree, I remember that when we translated Stephen King, nobody asked for a diploma, but we did need the knowledge, the skills that we got at the university. It seems to me that translator's background gives you more freedom and more confidence in what you do. We faced situations when there were colleagues who understand the books, whose Ukrainian is excellent, but they're afraid. They're afraid to change the syntaxes of the syntax of the. Are afraid to change something. Well, later they understand how to do that, and everything is great. But as they might be afraid by using antonyms, they say, "Oh, Can I really say that?" So they need to understand the linguistic principles, the basic transformations. Of course, it's not compulsory. We cannot say that a person cannot become a translator without a translator's degree, because nobody asked for a diploma when we started translating Stephen King. And the publishing house were quite surprised that we were so young. And this is after we actually translated a big part of the book. And later we were said, okay, so send us your documents and we need to sign a contract. And you mean 19 years? Are you 19? Really? Later, the editor said that she was shocked when she got to know our age. But at the same time, it proves that the fact that you don't always need a diploma, but the knowledge that we got when started, it helped us to implement this project within the tight deadlines.
And as an educator, I'm trying to teach my students to do literature translation. And also, I try to give them those approaches which might be very helpful on their ways. Of course, there are many ways, and you can do lots of things, but I do want that their literature translation would be really, really nice, because it's one of the the most wonderful films. And we have actually recall the topic of publishing, and we would like to ask you about the process and also the pieces of advice regarding that. So, what should was our notice or others advices, and maybe the topics dealing with the contracts, and what things might be very useful here to know. So you need to sign a contract. I cannot guarantee that if this contract is not implemented, you will be able to go to the court and to sue the publisher. But we need to constantly develop this topic. And I had an instance when I was starting to work with the publisher. They sent me a contract simply taken from the internet, and that gave me a chance to actually to request samples which have been developed for the translation of books with all the aspects which might be useful for the contracts, and they are very useful when you're dealing with the publishment. So once you are telling that I need these type of contracts, then you can negotiate other terms. When you're sending your work, you can negotiate what the time you need for the complaints in terms of other not qualitative translations, so, and other issues about the author's copywritings. And from my own experience, I can tell that it takes really an infinite amount of time. It actually takes 10, 15 years, and then I get my authorized back. So this is it that I wanted to tell. From my experience, I'd like to point that once I was doing a book, and the contract was really distorted, and publishers told me that actually that everything is going to be fine, and I need to go to the court. And here we are dealing with a very painful issue. So please tell us your experience. We are working with publishings. We are very comfortable to work with, and we don't have any problems. But there are issues. And here I can tell beginners try to negotiate. And when we actually started, we took an order for translations, and in terms of money, the advice is always negotiate the money price, and this is the only case when there is a matter not of through your evadings. You need to clearly know what the publisher wants for you, and please negotiate about money, and as early as you can. And this amount of money was really small, and publisher was keeping telling us you are going to have a lot of money, and it turns out that maybe that person really did have that amount of money, but we actually didn't have them at all. And I'd like to add that there are so many instances when a publisher advises, okay, we need to put this budget and then unofficially he advises, please let us add another sum. So please do think in advance about that, because some young interpreters or translators, they are ready to accept these terms, and please be aware that this trap can be on your way. And you need to have the right to sue the publisher, and you need to pay attention about the terms in the contracts. So and you need to understand all the terms. I've also have the question about the payment of the work, and I also know from many experience and from my own, the translation is not very good things to earn money and to make money for living, but rather for soul. So let's talk about the rates. I know that now we will have certain hysteric laughing, but let's talk about the ratings and what are the perfect figures and very often publishers are not going to pay exactly the same rates. So in your particular case, what was the amount of rates and what the beginners should be prepared for? I can say from the point of my own experience. So I started from the rate 120 hryvnias per page. Now I have a much more higher rates, and please, beginners, do not agree on the low rate. And it's a good thing that you were offered to translate a book, but constantly increase your rates, because this small number of money can be trapped for you. I was constantly raising these rates, and everyone knows that there are 60 page per pages and other ratings, and 30 hryvnias per page. Indeed. So you need to know that there are 120, 140, and 60 hryvnias per page, and it all depends on the publisher. But these tariffs does exist, and I do want to cite it for the beginners. We actually wanted to agree. You need to value yourself. The very first project can be on the lower rate, and of course we do have our first examples of work, and we actually don't want to show it others and how it actually looked like. And then after these first pieces of work, you need to take projects with the high rates, and if everyone agrees not to take the lower rates, then they will actually evaporate themselves. So there are students who take actually lower rates, because you need to value yourself, and this process of work is very taking efforts, and I'm doing not only with the literary translation, but I also translated the IT fields. So there are different variety of emotions, and they are uncomparable. So you do need to value your work, and now we are trying to work on those rates which are very normal for us and comfortable for our living. And and of course, there is a matter of charities, of course, but we are trying to get rid of it, um, we try to take normal rates, and it is normal to get rid of low tariffs. So, as I said, you can take it once, and we also did it like that. And but we had very high rate for translative king, but it was another type of rate. It was a reputational things, and we're so happy that we had this type of translation. I mean, this king translation, and it was a project which was doing well with our reputations. Once you have an offer which is not really good from the financial side, but you do understand that its failure and its reputational rate can be very valuable. So then you can tell people, okay, I did it, and this is my type of work. Of course, there are a matter of dreams, and after people will be saying that somebody did it for you. But anyway, I wanted to add in terms of the ratings. It is very important here to communicate with colleagues because nobody is going to write you the ratings on the Facebook, but only informal communication conversations you can understand and find out this publisher can actually pay more. So colleagues, please communicate and support each other, and we are going to keep talking about that. So go and communicate. All translators, and it seems to be they are all open people, and we can talk about the development of our field. And if you have any questions, you can actually write to me, text me on the Facebook. And colleagues, if you find out that someone actually works with the publishers, so you can simply talk with those people. So, and it's really worth it. I know translators who actually, before all these literature events, they were not aware of these ratings, and only thanks to these communications, they found out that publisher can pay more. Now we need to shift to the process of the translations. Let's imagine that you received a proposal, and there are two actually groups of translators. For example, on the other hand, there is Victor Morozov, who translated Harry Potter, and he once told on his interview that he doesn't like to read Harry Potter. So first he reads an original source, and then he translates it. Now the signal is disappeared. Can you hear me? So the signal has fallen a bit, so I apologize. So in fact, there are translators who think that you need to read from the beginning to the end of the book, but what's exactly your case? Do you read in advance? No, I don't do this, and it's almost impossible to read everything in advance, and of course it is much more interesting to work from the beginning, and especially when I deal with comics. And a piece of advice: once you agreed on a proposal, try to read the feedbacks, the reviews on these books. And once I took in proposal, and it was actually a torture for me to translate it because I failed to read the feedbacks. Katerina, what's your comment? But we actually are the opposite group. It is good that we are working online, and we are now online. we are so peaceful literature translators, but when you are talking about the groups, about the camps, we are trying to keep our reputation further. We are trying to read a book we are translating prior before we are starting to translate it, and there are several reasons for that, and because it is a matter of translations and the generic things. First, we try what is the book and what's the end of this of the story of this book, because a book can be started from one things and the end may be the way around different, and you may not like it. And the well-known novel by Stephen King is started that there is a kind of murder, and then it is ended with a very specific scene, which is not very liked by many people, and you always need to evaluate the text and evaluate in terms of your perceptions and comfort. And this is all about the generic. It should not contradict with your picture of the world, let's say, and you can like to communicate on the Facebook, and you can tend to be on the one way of style, but sometimes the book you're going to translate can be the way round from your world view. In the process of work, we do want to know the end of the book, and all these footnotes the authors is provided. And once you look at the carpet and the pattern of carpets, and you need to create the same. Once you come to the exhibition of the carpet, it is enough for you to look at all the carpets. So you understand everything is beautiful. So, but to make the copy of this carpet, you need to look at the back side and to understand all the not beautiful things and details. And when you're dealing with the text, it is even deeper understanding of this book. Even when we were preparing the reviews of the books, and during that period of time, we did not actually really getting deeper. But once you have read the book, only after you understand the end and the sense and all these details, what they were for, and these starting points were what for, and you are taking the pictures and you're trying to translate it on, and at the end of the story you find out that that heroes and you thought that it is actually was a man, and you have translated it as it was a man, and it actually took you 350 pages, and very often there is actually a game of words, and which may have a different sense at the end, and it is important to make it suitable and good in all places, and you can simply forget all these game of phrases, and then you need to work on that again and in the process. So were there any cases when we were doing with the science fictions? What we did, we Googled all the feedbacks, reviews. We were trying to understand what people like or not in order to understand are we on one side with the viewers or not? Do we agree or not? But we are fortunate that the book was good. But in fact, I have listened to you, and I understand that I need to read from the beginning. So it takes time to read that, and this part of job is not going to be paid, but it is a preparatory work. And it is a matter of your opinion. For example, Mr. Morozov is not interested to translate if he is not interested in book. If he knows that who is a murderer and it is a gardener. So I do understand him. So as for me, I have the opposite opinion.
For me, it is very important to understand what they also wanted to say, which aspects they use, how he works. I would like to understand how the author, how the writer creates the picture for the readers, because I need to do the same for Ukrainian readers. It was interesting to talk to colleagues because they have different approaches to different aspects of our work. In particular, some colleagues say that it is very difficult for them to work with psychologically difficult text. For example, it is difficult for them to translate horror books. They care too much, they are too fragile, too delicate about what is happening in the book. And after translating the book, they needed to spend several months to go into therapy, to talk to a therapist, to get well. We have a different approach because when we see something, a horror story, we say, wow, excellent. We needed to think about the ways to discuss Ukrainian readers in the same way. Once we rode in subway and we saw a person there, and we were discussing how we would be translating an excerpt of the book about something very bloody, very scary. So everything was okay, but the subway, the metro stopped, and then then another person said, "Okay, this is how what these people are talking about." So I have another question, Katerina. Once you said that shared translation or collective translation is not about losing your identity; it's about broadening your identity. So do you work in pair? You work with your husband. So what about an editor who joins you? So this is a so when you become a trio of people who work with the same book, well, uh, we were afraid of an editor at the beginning of our career because we thought that editors were those awful people who would like to showcase that we are awful translators, that we are nothing. Now, uh, we changed. The more we work in this field, the more we understand that editors are our friends. So this is another pair of eyes who will help us make the text perfect. It is very important because this project will be released into the world. Translation is like your child, so everyone will get a closer look on it. And without editor, I wouldn't agree to work at all. At the beginning of my career, of course, we had editors. We never worked without an editor. And that's just great because editors are really needed. We also like working together because of before the editor Tola takes a look at my translator, and then the editor takes a look at our shared work, and then the proofreader, and then another person who will take a look at this same text. So translation is not really that intimate, and we can let other people join us to make our work even better. But of course, we need to control everything because we need to differentiate because editors who help you, who work together with you to make the text better, this is an ideal editor. But the situations are different. We had different editors, and there were even cases when we wrote to the publisher and said that we cannot accept the edits because we are totally against it. We need another editor, we need another person. So you need also take that into account. You need to learn to understand when edits improve your text, and maybe you wouldn't say that, but it sounds better. And you need to differentiate it from cases where the editor uh, cannot does too much. Of course, you can discuss different edits with the editor. Editor is just a colleague that you work with. This is just another thought. You need to treat this person not as your manager, not as the person who is envious of you and who wants to make your text worse. If you really like something, you can agree. If you dislike something, you can disagree with the edits. Then the editor will, for example, add new arguments and to explain why this edit is valid. Or probably when you explain, when you state your point, and the editor agrees and say, "Oh, definitely, let's go with that." We had discussions both online and offline. And offline, we had a discussion with the editor, and of course, it was less epic than offline. That when the editor said, "I don't like your word, I should change that," and we said, "No, this is a good word. It is used. We need to use it here." So the editor said, "Okay, your arguments are valid." Or probably we can consult different dictionary and say that we shall replace this word. As for these epic fights with dictionaries, I would like to say that literary translators are very good, quiet people. They are very nice. So I hope that people don't think that you are bad. Another question to Hanna. You worked with different publishers, so editor can compare the original text, the source text, and the translation. Or other editors, they only take a look at the final text, final translation. So, what is your favorite type of editor, and would you give a piece of advice to the beginners how to work with editors? Just as Katerina, I was afraid of editors at first. I was looking at them as some kind of demigods that would make my translation ideal. Later, when I became more confident, I started rejecting some edits and I started differentiating what might make my translation better or worse. I had different experiences, but I would like to say that most of the editors were good. They improved my translation. But there was one case when I rejected cooperation with an editor. We had a terrible conflict. This editor didn't know French, and he criticized a lot of my words, and then he got a little bit too personal. And he criticized my age, my gender, so it seems to me that it was too much. So nothing good would get out of that cooperation. That is why, yes, they found another editor, and it was much better. The second editor was much better. So what I would like to say, as for the advice, as for the piece of advice, I would like to say that get ready for meeting bad editors. It will happen. The question is, how far can you go with them? How eager you are to fight for every word. I had cases when the publisher had to judge our conflict and to decide whether they need to accept my edit or the editor's edit. So because we couldn't find common language with the editor, but I can get on well with most editors because I think that I still learn and I need to listen to those who are more experienced than myself. Plus, the majority of editors, even if they didn't know French, it was obvious that at least they tried to translate the sentence using Google Translate or to consult dictionaries. So I really like this approach. This is not only editors who change minor words. I would like to add to what Anna has said. This is what differentiates the editors and the proofreader. The editor must work with the original text. We have been working as editors as well, and when we were doing the editing task, we also understood that we need to know the source language because all people make mistakes. In one of the comic books, one of the characters had 15 scientific degrees, and that was nothing but a number. But I translated it not as 15, but as 13. And Anatoly noticed this because he was my first reader. But if Anatoly didn't notice that, the editor would notice that if the editor knew the source language, because these words are similar in French. Of course, when we watch different films, we have a lot of questions. For example, we hear different numbers. In the original, we hear 6, and for example, 623, and in the translation, there is something like 762. So there was definitely a mistake. Something happened with the numbers, but we are all human beings, and such things happened. There was one case when the editor didn't know French, but he used Google Translate, and the translation was wrong. So we were pissed off because the translator used Google Translate, and I was really offended. I was really hurt. And I thought, so you consulted Google Translate, and you thought that I was wrong. And sometimes people say you were wrong because Google Translate does it in a different way. Yes, of course, it's not the right way to use Google Translate as a reference point. But of course, if the editor wants to get to the truth, that's good. When we were editing a book, for example, we had a text in the middle of which the source text was in Spanish or Swedish, I don't really remember. Of course, we don't know these languages. That is why we tried to translate it using Google Translate, just to understand what was going on. Translator and editor have the right to add notes to the text. So what's your approach to add notes? Do you try to explain the text to the slightest detail, or do you think that these notes they slow down reading of the text, and readers most probably won't take notice of all these notes? So, what do you think of these notes? What's your approach, and how often do you add them? Hanna? Okay, I can say that because I haven't translated a single novel. I only translated non-fiction novels, non-fiction books. But of course, but personally, I like reading notes, and of course, I mostly translate children books. So that is why we cannot add notes to that. So probably Katarina and Anatoly will tell more that. Well, notes are possible in comic books if it is quite a large book. And if you manage to persuade the publisher that you need that, but if if you can get rid of the notes, then probably you shall do that. Everything depends on the situation. For example, Alan Moore has been translated into Ukrainian. Guards was translated by Yaroslava Strilha, and another book, V from Vedetta, was translated by us. Yaroslav Nazarenko was doing the editing, and we tried to add notes by him. We just extracted information from a fresh book about Alan Moore, which hadn't been published yet when Mr. Nazarenko was working with these notes. But his notes are quite long. They are published at the end of the comic book. But I would like to say that it doesn't happen often. Alan Moore is rather an exception. And Neil Gaiman, I think the similar situation is with Neil Gaiman. Notes by Mr. Nazarenko are divided into several parts. You can read some of the notes while you read the books. Some of them are in the end of the book after you read the graphic novel, so you feel comfortable and that there are no spoilers. So as far as I understood, we really love notes, and we try to explain, but we don't try to explain everything because it's not necessary. There were cases when translators and the publisher did add a lot of notes, which were quite obvious. when we see notes such as hip hop is a popular musical genre, it's quite strange, isn't it? Or, for example, uh, if a note explains that a character uses this particular quote because it was used in a movie which adds something about this character, of course that's useful, because we have colleagues who are absolutely against notes. They provide a lot of arguments, starting from that it's not necessary because it slows down the reader, and we often hear complaints from readers that there are too many notes and it prevents me from going deep into the text. So, well, don't read the note if it slows down your reading process. When you are reading a book, when you're reading a translation, there are some aspects which you notice, and you really want to tell more about them because you think that they're important, and they might add the reader to understand this novel better. Because the question is, of course, maybe the writer didn't want to add these notes because they wanted the reader to understand everything by themselves. But it sometimes happens that the reader doesn't even know where to look for the explanations. But for example, in a children animated movie, for example, The Simpsons, there is a visual allusion to the Midnight Cowboy film. It's quite difficult to understand this reference if you are not interested in cinema industry at all, but it adds a lot to the understanding of this film, of this animated film. That is why, in my opinion, it is a very important aspect of our work. And we try to translate jokes. We try to translate everything which can be translated. Of course, it's very important, but we do need notes. For example, for American readers, so this is just common background, but Ukrainian readers sometimes don't know that. But it's not a problem. We all grow up in different cultures.
Maybe the author would like to add his own old jokes. And there is a TV show on Division, and our audience had these, I don't know, harsh arguments that the scenes are very developed, and they can see the heroes in the others TV show. So it is well known that the audience was not grown up in particular circumstances, and these allusions do not have any sense, and these audience simply don't know that this is simply allusion, and it is so strange for them to the heroes in these strange scenes. And to end our conversations, I have the questions I would like to ask you on the topic the movie translators, because it is a shady thing for translation, where the translation simply takes a book, and a reader simply notice who has translated this book by the end work or in coincidence. So what's the trend for that? Is it going to be changed, and what translators can do to get rid of this shadow, and to point to the reader that this particular person has translated this book. In my opinion, this work should be in the field of this work. In order to get rid of the shadow, you need to become an actor, so to say, and in order to improve our job conditions, it is worth to do it. To do that, you need to develop your field skills to voice these problems, and to communicate with the publisher, to mention the names, because it doesn't take a lot of money, but it is so important for the translators. And in fact, you need to communicate about your work to everyone. For example, you do like social media, you need to write to make posts about that, and this way you are going to recommend the books to your friends. And in fact, the ordinary audience who are not dealing with the literary translations, they are learning that this text has been translated, and they know by whom. And also, all my friends noticed who has translated this or that book, and I am not needed to point to that to them. And we also noticed that publishers started to put the name of translators on the cover of book, but it is rather an exception than a rule. And the person who worked on this book, it should be a matter of this person to point out that sometimes people don't like particular words, and maybe it was edited by a proofreader, and only after this person points out to the translators. We had 5 times when we were asked to delete these books, and then we opened the second sections and we still noticed the same words naturally. And you need to to promote your professionalism, expertise, and you need to pull the efforts of many translators, and it is easy to work when you're not alone against all the whole publishing. But once you are the team of translators, it's much more easy. And any visibility, it is worth doing, because it is our work. We all want to receive good reviews, feedbacks about our works. People are writing reviews, and they may notice, maybe very shortly, briefly, the person who did these translations, and we notice the reviews. And when we do reviews, we always notice the translators, because you read his words and his jobs, and it is a good thing to, or not a good thing, not to mention on the website. And sometimes a person can think, who was a translator of that, and maybe it doesn't matter for that person. Someone can choose this way of development, and maybe people are choosing the books by the number of pages the book includes, and maybe if a book actually has about half a kilogram, they are not going to buy it. Maybe our audience has a question, and yes, we do have one. So thank you so much, Bogdana Anatoly. I'm so excited to see you. It's always a kind of pleasure for my heart. And you, Bogdana, you did a nice job as a moderator, but I need to hear your stories, because it is often a brilliant example and it is worth everyone to hear it. So what's your way to the literature translation, and so what is going on there actually? Thank you so much. And I started to translate when I almost graduated for the publishing, and it was a happy coincidence when my teacher has recommended me to the publisher, which was looking for translators. And then I was studying in German, and when I received a letter, I was working in a library, and there should be no noise there. And when I received this invitation, I was trying to be as silent as I could, because it was in a library. And I also started with very low rates, because I really wanted to have a published book, and it was a priority for me. And I did know that it was a damping thing, but anyway, it was a kind of speed up for me to shift to other rates, and now I'm translating for a publishing of kids books, and I'm so happy that I can be involved to the world of translations, and I'm so happy to be here at the UTIC 2021 for the first time, and I also invite you to come to our event when we are communicating and work which is others, and we are able there to listen to other stories, because it's highly important. So thank you so much for this question. It was so interesting to listen to my short story, because my story here was that my contract was breached 3 times, and I added that story to my career path. So, hello everyone. I'm so happy that you all have managed to gather here, and I have the following question. Among interpreters, there is a tradition that a translator has been specializing on a topic, on a certain field. Is it really a necessary thing to do? So I'll be brief. I tried to find my niche, but in fact this niche found me, and now I'm working only with the kids' books and comics, but it was not my first goal. But once I was proposed to do that, I decided to be engaged in. And anyway, I think that you need to have a niche, a field of your expertise. You need to love this field. For example, you may love kids' books, and you need to be so involved in that, to have passion, to have so much comfort about that, and then you will have the best possible results. We do agree with Ghana, and it turns out that we have a niche, and we're working with science fiction, and other fields are a bit difficult for us, and we love comics and a bit of kids literature. So specialization on niche comes to you anyway, and then actually it turns out that people are proposing you particularly that type of books or genres, and if, for example, we were asked to translate an English version of Marx, we think we wouldn't agree to that type of joke, because we are working on that. We are working, and we're not going to work on those fields where we are not really aware in, and it will take us much more time, and so sometimes when you're dealing with the postmodernist literature, you're always hesitating, is it that term or this, and these are nuances which are very important, and your field specialization comes to you anyway. So I need to once again to mention regarding should I read the book first or not, and here I would say that you need to be interested and really like and engaged in that, because if you was reading a book and it was so boring for you, then it will be a real torture for you to translate it. I would like to add that recently I have been working with the kids literature, and once the offer is over, the publisher has sent me other topics, and I was able to choose, and among all this list, the only book was about literature. All the rest was about time management and so on. And I have chosen this particular book, and this particular a brand new thing for me, 350 pages, and I'm still getting acquainted to that, and I'm still looking to my field, because first I thought that my field is kids literature, but once I have a chance to try something else, I actually capture this opportunity, and maybe then I will return to the literature. And you need to understand what you like or not. You shouldn't actually jump to nowhere. Or, in fact, you should, because you don't really know what the income or outcome will be.